Earlier in the week, I made my Week 5 college football predictions. And I said that we are in store for a big week in college football. We've got a couple top 10 matchups. We've got 4 top 25 matchups. And just by looking at the current top 10, I'll even go as far as saying just by looking at the current top 25. I think that this week and next week is really going to set the tone for how the rest of the season is going to go. Alabama takes on Ole Miss this week in what I think will be Alabama's biggest challenge. At least for now. I mean, I'll get into the next example in a little bit. But Alabama taking on Ole Miss this week. Their biggest challenge, in my opinion, until the SEC championship game. No matter if they are playing Georgia or if they're getting a rematch with Florida, the SEC title game, I think, will be Alabama's biggest challenge. But until then, their biggest challenge is this week against Ole Miss. And Georgia is taking on Arkansas. And this game will also set the tone for how the rest of Arkansas' season will go, in my opinion. If Arkansas is able to compete really well against Georgia, even if they don't win, even if they make it a very close game, if they lose by, 7 or 10, then I think that Arkansas, maybe they are a potential challenge for Alabama. But if they get blown out by 20 or 30, then it's possible that maybe Arkansas just isn't there yet. They aren't as close as what we thought last week. But Arkansas, I think, is on the rise. But to determine how close they are to coming to being back to, well, being a legitimate threat in the SEC, I think it's going to come down to how they perform this week. Oregon goes on the road against Stanford, and Oregon doesn't have the best history against Stanford on the road. In fact, Oregon doesn't have the best history against Stanford, period, because there's been a couple times in recent memory where Oregon is ranked this high, and once they got to Stanford, they completely lost. And this might be a potential trap game for Oregon. Penn State takes on Indiana, but next week, Penn State takes on Iowa. And if Iowa wins, and if Penn State wins, it's going to be a top 5 matchup. It's going to have college football playoff magnitude in that game. But I think Maryland is also a trap game for Iowa this week, because I remember receiving a comment a couple of weeks ago about how Maryland is not a team to take lightly, and that Maryland could be a surprise team this season, and that they can hang points on anybody. And I think that Maryland can pull off the upset against Iowa, and I think Maryland's magic number is 28. I think if they can put up 28 points on Iowa, I think Maryland is going to pull off the upset in that game. Now we have Oklahoma going up against Kansas State on the road. Could this be a trap game for Oklahoma? Well, Oklahoma has lost to Kansas State in each of the last 2 seasons. But it's possible that Kansas State might be down to their third-string quarterback. And Oklahoma has really struggled the entire season. They played West Virginia close. They played Nebraska close. They even played Tulane close. So those close wins against those 3 teams. In their defense, though, Nebraska and West Virginia, they have some really strong defenses. I'd say some of the most underrated defenses in college football that nobody's really mentioning, because we always like to mention the Georgia defense. I'd say even the Oregon defense, the Iowa defense, the Penn State defense, the Alabama defense, even the Florida defense. Oklahoma took on, I'd say, 2 of the more underrated defenses in all of college football. And they played them close. But Oklahoma just doesn't look as dominant as we're used to seeing. And I think this game against Kansas State, I think is really going to set the tone for how the rest of Oklahoma's season will go. Cincinnati takes on Notre Dame, a battle of undefeated teams. And if Notre Dame wins against Cincinnati, then what would Notre Dame's biggest challenge be after this? It would be Virginia Tech in my mind, because going on the road to Blacksburg, that is a very tough place to play. And I did mention that Notre Dame has a grueling schedule coming up, but North Carolina is struggling this season, and so is USC. But if Cincinnati wins this game, their biggest challenge left, well, their biggest challenges are going to be UCF and SMU, because SMU is off to a great start this season. And I did mention Arkansas earlier. To round up the top 10 with Florida, Florida's only loss this season is a 2-point loss to Alabama. And if Florida can just take care of their business, they're going to win the SEC East, and they'll get a rematch against Alabama. And we'll see if they can pull off the win the second time around. But there are still quite a bit of games left in this college football season that's going to have major college football playoff implications. But I think this week and the next week, as said in the beginning, will set the tone for the rest of the season. So if I had to guess who was on upset alert and the possibilities of them losing this week, I think that, to tell you the truth, all these teams right here that you see on the screen, I think it's possible they could be upset this week. Except for maybe Penn State. I think Oklahoma's going to beat Kansas State, as I had that in my Week 5 predictions. I wouldn't be surprised if Florida lost, but I think Florida's going to win. Oregon, you just never know. Depends on which Stanford team shows up to that game. I think Cincinnati could potentially lose this week. I picked Notre Dame to win that game. I think Iowa will lose if their defense gives up 28 points. Alabama, it's possible if Ole Miss makes that a shootout, if Ole Miss can force some turnovers, get some takeaways, get early momentum, then I think Ole Miss can pull off the upset. I just want to see if Arkansas can move the football on this Georgia defense, and if they can, then that might set the tone for the rest of the year, and they could potentially challenge Alabama, because I did say in the Week 5 predictions that if Arkansas, if they can move the football really well on that Georgia defense, then they can move the ball well against anybody. So we'll see. Until next time, have a great day.